Good morning, my friends. Welcome to our New Testament challenge. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some thoughts and reflections from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John. John chapter 6. So, John focuses in on a lot of the interactions between Jesus and the people around him. And we've spent the last couple of days talking about the authority of Jesus and the authority of who he was, but and the truth of his teaching as well. Here we see some more signs, and we see glimpses of his power, and then he also he goes deeper and he talks about the reality of who he is, and there's some conflict there, some struggles with people understanding and accepting what he says. But the first section here in the 6th chapter is John's version of feeding of the 5,000, and he this around Passover. He goes up on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They follow him, so he goes up the mountain and sat down with his disciples, and he sees the large crowd coming to find him, and he says, "All right, let's where can we get bread to feed these people?" And his disciples said, even 6 months' wages wouldn't buy enough for everybody to have just a little bit. And Andrew said, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish." She said, "Okay, have everybody sit down. Now take the loaves and the fish and distributed to those who were seated and as much as they wanted." I thought that was interesting. And when they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." And they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. And when the people saw the sign that had been done, they said, "Surely this is the prophet who has come into the world." Now, in this next verse is something that's unique to John. When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Again, the folks did not understand. They saw power, and so they wanted that power to be over them and to save them from whatever. That's all they saw. They saw the power. And so when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. Well, the sea became rough, and when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus come walking on the sea, and they were terrified. But he said, "It is I, do not be afraid." And then they wanted to take him into the boat, and as soon as they decided that, they reached the land where they were going. Now, the crowds came down early in the morning, and they knew Jesus hadn't gone anywhere. They knew the disciples had gone to the other side, and they're like, "Okay, how did he get there?" And so they were curious. So that a lot of them got in the boats, and they went across to the other side to find Jesus and the disciples, and said, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" And Jesus said, "You come looking for me, not for signs, not to believe, but because you got a full belly. You ate the bread and the fish, and you want to see more. You're more interested in the signs than in the reality behind the signs." And so he starts talking to him. He says, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And Jesus says, "This is the work of God, that you believe in me, in him who he has sent." Oh, that's interesting. And they said, "Okay, what signs are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." And Jesus said, "You're right. It was not Moses who gave you the bread. It was my Father who gave true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And they said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Then Jesus says, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But I have said this to you, that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. I come from heaven. I'm here. And so they complained. They began complaining. He says he's the bread of heaven. We've got manna. And a lot of people struggle with this. They have one vision of what faith ought to be. And when it is different, it is difficult for them to expand their understanding. And so they had this image of the manna. That's the only bread of heaven God has ever sent. God saved the Israelites with the bread of heaven. And so when Jesus says, I am the bread of heaven, it literally blew their minds. They did not really understand what to think. And Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, whoever believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. I am the living bread that comes down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. And the bread that I give you for the life of the world is my flesh. Now, he obviously is talking about his crucifixion, his death. And but the Jews, again, were taking this literally. They said, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? Cannibalism? They didn't say that. And he says, unless you drink his blood, unless you eat his body and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them up on the last day. He said these things while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. Now, many of the disciples heard it, and they said, this teaching is difficult. Yeah. They struggled with it. Who can accept it? Jesus says, if it offends you, what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh is useless. And he said, for this reason I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father. And so many of his disciples left. They, for whatever reason, we talk about, there's a lot of folks that come to church, and there's a variety of people who are there. There are true disciples who are seeking to learn. There are seekers. There are people who kind of believe, but and there are folks who are surface believers. They like what they hear, but they're not ready to go deeper. They don't want to sacrifice. They want the feel good of it, but nothing else. And so the people who were feeling good about Jesus, they when he started talking about deeper stuff, when he talked about more difficult stuff, they said, that's enough. We're out of here. And Jesus talks to his 12 disciples, says, what about you? Are you going to leave too? And Peter says, Lord, to whom can we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. And Jesus said, did I not choose you? And yet one of you is a devil. Talking a reference to Judas. So they understood who he was. But many people did not. And again, it's not so very different in today's world. There are people who truly believe and people who kind of believe, and yet when the going gets tough, they leave. So I hope that you understand truly what Jesus is talking about when he says, I am the bread of heaven, and I am the living water, and that you receive that each and every day. Thanks a lot, my friends. We'll talk to you tomorrow.